Hello, I'm Mark Baer. Welcome back to the Joe Cupcake Chronicles. We are in Volume 1, Part 2, In the Beginning Was the Word. The question is, what is funny? Well, I often think about what is funny, and Joe Cupcake also thinks about what is funny. And funny is not necessarily the person who tells jokes, but funny is also the way one sees the world. One either sees the world as humorous or one does not. And for somebody as challenged as Joe Cupcake, it's best that he does see the world as humorous. What I, as the writer of this, have discovered is one doesn't even have to be funny to be funny. One of the featured artists is Mark Rothko in this piece. And Mark Rothko wanted to touch the divine through his art. Rothko believed he was looking for this portal in his work. That's why you'll see these squares with these internal squares of color there. And he was just looking for this door to this greater celestial world. Much of this piece is about art and what is the value of art. And is art a commodity, or is it something purely not a commodity, or is it some combination thereof? And again, the ironies of this. So Rothko, imagine sitting on the street unframed. Would people walk by it? Would people leave it there? Would people even stop to take a second look? So again, part of what we're trying to do here, what I'm trying to do here, is make myself look and make Joe Cupcake, this is what Joe Cupcake is doing. He's trying to look around him to differentiate a work of art as it appears to him in life, as opposed to looking at art as a commodity. And the best illustration of this in real life, which I must say, as I repeat often, I believe in God because who writes this stuff? You can't compete with God's mighty pen. And I'm thinking of my friend Doug Himmelfarb, who you may have read about in the New York Times magazine recently, who found a Rothko in a garage sale and has enough documentation to prove it's real, but the one man who authenticates them, he got in an argument with Doug Himmelfarb, because he's got a bit of a prickly personality, and won't authenticate the piece. So this guy has this thing that could be worth, $25 million, but because he can't get the signature, it is worth nothing and ruining his life. So what is the worth of a piece of art? In part 2 here, we will also be looking at J.W. Turner. Coco Chanel will be making a visit, Louis Buñuel, Man Ray. All our favorite icons are here. The thrill of it is that you get to hang out with your betters in your imaginary life. Sunset, magic hour. Pale blue to bright orange streaked across the sky in a single brush stroke. And Joe saw an alligator with a scaly back. Joe thought of Chinese calligraphy, how a single stroke could imply so much. Don't choose the color. Feel the color. Red, yellow, orange, black. October in Seattle. The sky heavy. Melancholy city. The girl in the Starbucks looked like Audrey Hepburn. Joe wanted to tell her that the 50-year celebration of breakfast at Tiffany's was out on DVD. Instead, he made a sketch of her in his notebook and added a line of T.S. Eliot. I have heard the mermaids singing, each to each. I do not think they will sing to me. When the rain stopped, the light softened. Joe yearned to roll in a pile of leaves. He was thinking of ink dropped into water and words dropped into swirling ink. Joe was looking for beauty that was not idealized, not fussy, not arranged just so. He was searching for a new mode of expression, an art form to fit his displacement. He was looking for density, a concentration of reality, a cool groove. Art is what you say it is. If you deem it so, so shall it be. Joe wanted images ripe with meaning, but he didn't want to pick them. He wanted them to fall randomly and stain him with their juice. Joe would repeat his images over and over until a new image appeared on the conveyor belt. If everyone was Joe, would he pick up the better habits or the worse habits? There would be Joe on the sports page, Joe on the town. Handsome Joe posed only in men's briefs, 2 for 1 sale. Wanted Joe, Joe on parole. So many Joes to pick from, so many ways to be. Joe the movie star. How would he feel about autographs? Would he hone it down to a simple J, like a fish hook? Hey, Joe, sign my book. Joe dreamed he was a fashion designer. He dressed his models in tight-fitting short square dresses that looked like sacks of cement and mortar, quick-dry, 90-pound bags. He'd probably spent too much time in the hardware store searching for humane ways to control rodents. Which leads us to the poor rat. Joe saw it out the window. His wife said, "Hit it with a shovel." It was on the lawn dying or giving birth. There were no babies on closer inspection when Joe arrived with the shovel. It was cute, furry with a long tail. Joe moved it out of the yard and placed it in a protective place in the ice plants out front. Then he moved it again over to his neighbor's house. He didn't want to bludgeon it, but he didn't want it to crawl under his house. He'd probably poisoned the rat and felt terrible, but at the same time, he was thinking about buying more poison. Joe wanted the rats dead, but he didn't like seeing his handiwork up close. An existential dilemma to be pondered. And what if hawks ate the poisoned rats? Would they get sick? War as hell, thought Joe, before his mind drifted back to fashion and how his houndstooth sports coat got frisky passing a store window showcasing a mannequin clad in a houndstooth skirt. His arm lunged toward the window, and there was growling and pelvis thrusting. Joe chalked it up to animal magnetism and trotted on. Above, the sky was darkening. If I could find anything blacker than black, I would use it, said British romantic landscape painter J.M.W. Turner, while out at sea, strapped to the mast, painting a storm. Joe didn't want to paint a storm. He wanted to dance in a storm, whirl in a storm. He was inspired by the Sufi poet Rumi. Dance when you're broken open. Dance if you've torn the bandage off. Dance in the middle of the fighting. Dance in your blood. Dance when you're perfectly free. Joe wanted to whirl like a dervish. He'd been watching the news about Turkey, where Rumi was buried. Mayhem in the park, gas tanks, Istanbul besieged. Prime Minister Erdogan called the protesters çapulcu, meaning looters, bums, and ne'er-do-wells. The protesters embraced the term, used it as a rallying cry, pushed back with art, and Joe saw himself writing on a wall with the blackest paint he could find. I am Çapul. Every day I am chapeling. Yeah, Erdogan.
The past is gone. Still, the movie plays on and on. The light and the dark and the light, like looking out a window on a train. The billboard across the station reads, "When it comes to black and white, no one does it like Schwartz and Weiss." But the train has left. You are on the platform. No refund for the ticket. When fear is large, our joy is small. When our joy is large, our fear is small. Humpty Dumpty will shatter. Give thanks while he's still in the shell. Veils of illusion, layers of meaning. Joe put a magnifying glass to his eye for a larger perspective. Nothing got clearer. It all blurred, out of focus. But then, crack, Joe dropped into the mystery. All the mind chatter went silent. Joe was part of the whole, nameless, without ego or regret, for once not running the wrong movie. Not running any movie, except the movie in front of him, around him, above and below him, all senses immersed. What is enlightenment then? Is it everyday life, except you're an inch off the ground? Well, you dance or you don't. The mighty Wurlitzer. It plays its own tune. Enlightenment is not a permanent state. It is a moment. You must be aware and present and waiting. There is a moment every day. Sometimes you can't see it directly. You have to catch it out the corner of your eye, or go around a corner and smack into it. Put another coin in the machine, pick a tune, and listen to the breeze undulating around the bamboo.
Cut 2. Animated Joe. On Circe's island, men were swine, but otherwise life was fine. Our hero said he sold swizzle sticks in Switzerland and Swaziland. Truth was, he played piano and some percussion in rundown dives. A hep cat, though, strictly on the solid side. It was the day of the feast of the new moon. Women with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes smoked fat cigars, while wizards peeped and muttered, and one of them turned a man into a walking stick. Then Joe was in a cave with a giant. The giant grabbed him and shook him and popped him in his mouth. Joe sang, "I'm as helpless as a kitten up a tree." Iris out. A round hole closed. That's all, folks. The end. That's the common experience. Dust to dust for one and all. And while there is life, live it up. Joe repeated his mantra. The only normal people are the ones you don't know very well. Joe was with his friend Eddie. They'd been through it all together, many chapters, many adventures. The talk was of highborn lowlifes. The Proustian occasion warranted a Guermantes perspective, and that famous Guermantes wit. Joe told Eddie how he'd just gone through the book for the third time, and when he started at the beginning yet again, he realized why the first 100 pages were so difficult. There were no introductions, no explanations, no contextualization. It just started, bam, like life. "Yeah, bub," Eddie said, "in search of lost mine, that's you." Before he shifted to how his latest paramour complained he was not on Facebook. "She's got 511 Facebook friends. I've had maybe 11 friends in my life, and most of those were pets. And I sure like them more than most of the jerk-offs I can't remember." Eddie probably didn't remember most of those whose path he had crossed, but they all remembered him. Eddie was bigger than life. They were on a vast veranda, being seduced by an alluring golf course, the soft late afternoon Bay Area light beckoning them for a twilight round. That wasn't in the cards. They were in coat and tie, completely respectable from a few feet away, at an exclusive country club. It was a memorial for a friend's mother. As Joe glanced at the bar to see if the line had lightened, a man appeared and bear hugged Eddie. R.K. was in his late 40s, thinning gray hair, blue blazer, and so immaculately middle-aged, Joe couldn't imagine him as ever being young and twisted. But R.K., like Eddie, was a legend, and not just for getting his money out of the market before it crashed. When R.K. moved on, Joe asked Eddie, "Was that the pervert who hid in the corner of your bedroom in London with the pantyhose over his head while you were in bed with some chick?" Eddie said, "The panty crotch was over his nose, and the legs were tied like bunny ears. And when my girlfriend saw him, he told her not to be scared, and asked if he could get in bed with us." Eddie peered out at the first fairway, envisioning the scene, then imitating R.K. "Don't worry, this could be fun." And after she ran out screaming, he calmly made me tea, with her pantyhose still over his head. Later, when Eddie and Joe were driving home, they passed R.K. and his wife in their late model BMW. They'd just picked up their kids from school. R.K., prosperous, proud family man, waved and pointed them toward the freeway ramp. Eddie smiled. Yeah, he wore Savile Row suits when he worked at Lloyd's of London, and would pull his dick out in a crowded pub and wait to see if anyone noticed. And no one ever noticed. The Brits, they just never looked down. Then, after a period of silence, Eddie said, "Okay, I'll get a Facebook page. But pets only."
What's not to like about love? Joe was thinking about love. More specifically, Valentine's Day, that holiday selling love. Joe was among the last-minute shoppers at Long's Drug. Everyone was frantically buying chocolate, heart-shaped balloons, and expensive cards. Holidays mean huge markups, and customers happy to pay the price because they showed up at home empty-handed. The price was much steeper. All the men looked bedraggled, and it was clear that only duty made them endure this task. Love, love, love. Nothing says, "I love you," like $12 worth of nothing. Joe wasn't putting it down. There'd be hell to pay if he didn't make this trip. He was happy to pony up, and those registers were ringing. And heaven knows, Joe didn't want to write his own card. It was enough just to write the inscription, "Love Joe," with a drawing of a misshapen heart. But Joe did wish he could cash in with a holiday of his own, maybe in March. The timing would be good because all that Valentine's Day candy would be 50% off. He'd patent it, register it, copyright it, whatever his lawyer said. Then he'd promote it with the help of some detox celebrity and make a deal with Hallmark. Spring, birds, bees, rising sap. Something for all those guys who hadn't been laid since Valentine's Day. But what? Kama Sutra Day? Too foreign. Or Couples Day? Kinda bland. Something romantic, religious, and patriotic all at once would be best. Throw in a tradition of heavy drinking like St. Patrick's Day. Something cute like Easter eggs. Joe was thinking rum-soaked confections when it came to him. Joe Cupcake Day. A day to celebrate self. Maybe a solitary walk on the beach and later a wank. But who needed to buy a card for that? Big Joe, in his body, was looking straight ahead. To an observer, he would have appeared focused on the film unspooling before him, a work of high-minded seriousness. But little Joe, a.k.a. the Peanut, had shuffled off to a small theater way in the back of his interior cineplex. His minders hadn't seen him slip off. They had been lulled to sleep. The showgirls, the Joettes, were friskier than usual, naked and furry, soft and downy, peachy, fuzzy, soft, fresh and fleshy. All different, and they all smelled so good.
Pornography, piped the Peanut. Always good. It made him think of the 6th grade. He'd spent the night at his friend Larry's house, and they got into his father's porno. This was long before internet. This was Super 8, played on a rickety projector. Production values aside, though, the film made a strong impression. A truck driver stopped for a woman hitchhiker. She stripped down, and they went at it in the middle of the road. At the end, the driver got back in his truck and drove off, leaving the woman stranded. Joe had seen many better videos since this, but it was etched in memory and now playing in Joe's brain. Staying in reality was always a challenge if he got bored, and Joe was bored. And feeling a tinge grimy because he wasn't a better person, a more refined cupcake with finer sprinkles. In the main cinema, Joe was meant to be watching a film that a friend edited. It was in French, so Joe couldn't understand exactly what was going on, but the filmmaker had given people in wheelchairs cameras that they were instructed to hide. The audience never saw the subjects, but the director did occasionally freeze frame on the reaction shots of the people they encountered. It obviously was a difficult experience being in a chair. There was a scene in a shopping mall where the chair couldn't get up a step to the restaurant. In another scene in Germany, a woman in a store kept taking things away from the person in the chair. Like Prometheus strapped to a rock, being chair-bound didn't seem good in any country, which seemed obvious to Joe. But if in one country people threw flowers, and in another people dropped coins on the chair, and in another people kneeled and prayed, and in another people heaped abuse, this would have been a window into significant cultural differences. Joe knew he was supposed to be moved, but his mind kept wandering back to the stranded woman in the long-ago porno film. His inner critic called it smarmily sublime. The ridiculous meets the slime. Still, he'd heard that in Paris, the documentary he was supposed to be watching received a standing ovation. And Joe knew if he'd made this film and exposed himself as the retrobait he was, he'd have included slapstick, pratfall sound effects, and an invalid wearing a sign saying, "Kick me," or a naked woman, always good in art films. Maybe she'd be hitchhiking. Joe also had to admit he'd never had the nerve to ask for a budget large enough to shoot his movie in 4 separate countries. But he would shoot it in French. No reason not to hedge his bet.
A man can live alone, but he cannot bury himself. Even Robinson Crusoe needed a Friday, and every Friday buries a Thursday, wrote James Joyce.
Joe was sipping his morning coffee and waiting for the brain fog to clear. The mist was dense, but it would burn off in time. He never rushed the process. Oh, wow. He was looking out at the oak trees. The morning sunlight was stretching west. Clear as could be, he saw a wood nymph. There he was, well, maybe not totally clear, but somehow familiar. Joe recognized the face, or it seemed familiar, and although the glasses were missing, it was James Joyce. There he was, looking at Joe. Joe had never noticed him before, but if Joyce was looking at him, he had always been looking at him these many mornings, drinking his morning coffee. Perhaps Joe hadn't noticed him because the sun had never been quite right. Joe ran to his office to get his camera. He would hunt down this spirit. But when he got to the backyard and looked up at the tree, there was no sign of Joyce. Joe was sure he had the right tree. Back in the house, he sat in his chair, and James Joyce was there again. Joe tried one more time with the camera, but again in vain. What he saw through the lens was limbs and branches and knots. No Joyce. His face took shape only at a distance, and with the right light at the right angle. No wonder readers think Finnegan's Wake is elusive. If you asked Joe why he believed in God, he would answer that no one had an imagination like God's, especially when it came to comedy. An example? 2 words: Casey Price. It's what his 7th grade teacher called Neil H. Roderick II, 29, who had been passing himself off as a 12-year-old. Joe saw the story in the news and clipped it out. He immediately saw the TV show, saw himself pitching it, spewing nuggets about how convicted sex offenders weren't inherently funny, but neither was murder, the staple of TV entertainment. And, as any fiction reader knows, it is easy to become sympathetic to the protagonist, no matter how bent, if they entertain us. Think Humbert Humbert. Anyone as audacious as Mr. Roderick can't be without humor, and this show about the day-to-day lives of 4 sex felons living as a family would be told from the inside, with the grandfather going to PTA meetings, the weird uncle checking the homework, and Brian Nillis as the cousin applying the makeup and administering the razor work. Roderick met Nellis in prison, and he was in on the deception. Roderick met Grandpa and the uncle trolling the internet, and they thought he was a minor. The show had "hit" written all over it. And yet, as a writer, Joe felt inadequate in the shadow of God's mighty pen. Headline haiku: Neil H. Roderick II, 29, passing his 12. 7th grade was fun.
And back to Joe's brain.
The staff in the control room all wore thin black ties and white shirts, an homage to the IBM look of old. The look was meant to give the appearance of order. Still, the pictures streamed across the monitors incessantly. War, strife, famine, markets spiraling down. But he kept his exterior mental wallpaper pleasant. A picture of his dog, a flower, a fluffy cloud. The genius of marketing is we see the brand and not the thing. Marlboro country, cowboys in yellow rain slickers, horses in open country. Light up, you can almost taste it. Lucky we don't get a pile of chicken heads with our McNuggets. Lucky we don't see how meat is made. Pass the steak sauce. Smiley bombs, kaboom.